Hello, everyone. Today, we'll be having a session about what developers want and what platform people can actually do about it. Should be a very cool session hosted by Kostis from the Codefresh team. Also, don't worry if you miss some part of it, or if someone joins midway, or if you want to show the content of this session to someone else on your team. The session will be recorded, and the recording will also be uploaded to our YouTube channel, as well as sent via email to everyone that signed up for the webinar. And with that, Kostis, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Mo. So first of all, I have to say I'm really excited about this because I watched several port webinars in the past, and I was in the audience, and now finally I can do a webinar on my own and talk about port the way I want. So my name is Kostis. I'm working as a developer advocate at Codefresh, and probably for the first time ever, Mo will be today with us in the second seat. He will be here for only the hard questions. I can answer the easy questions as well. So this is the agenda. Essentially, we're going to have like a mixture of, theory, demo, theory, demo, theory, demo. The most interesting demo is the last one, but I have some intermediate demos, that explain how we reached that process and what we did. Now, several presentations start, and the presenter says, "Oh, this is the best tool ever. You should use it. Start right now." And I don't think this is how you should do presentations. I think we need to talk about people first. People are important, not tools. And also tools, exist in order to solve the problems of people. So let's talk about people first and their problems. So I'm going to talk about 3 different types of people. They are the usual, let's say, personas in a company that are interested in the software delivery process or take part in the software delivery process. We have developers, and they are the ones writing code and sending features in production. We have operations or ops, or SREs, or cloud engineers, or DevOps people, or infra people. They have many different names. For the purposes of today's presentation, I'm going to put them in a single bucket, and essentially they are the people that are handling the systems. They keep the systems healthy. And then we have everybody else. So everybody else who is interested in the software delivery process, but maybe they do not, write code or keep systems healthy. So maybe it's your DevOps person, or your CTO, or your department lead, or somebody else who wants to know how the software delivery process is going within your company. And it should be clear that these 3 different categories of people need different things, and they have different, completely, let's say, ideas on how software should be delivered. Developers are very straightforward. They just write code. That's the only thing they are interested in. They want to write code and send code to production. They want to move fast. So as fast as possible, they want to send their features quickly into production. And contrary to popular belief, they don't really care about, the systems, like where is production, where is the database, where is the staging system, and they certainly don't want to learn Kubernetes. Like if we're talking about cloud native application Kubernetes is an extra complexity for them. They're not really interested in Kubernetes. And they would like, to have an easy way to create environments for testing their features, and their preferred, let's say, ways to click buttons. I'm a developer, I want quickly an environment or a database. I would like to click a button and then get it over with. So these are developers. And then we have the DevOps people or infra people. And in a sense, they are the exact opposite. They are keeping systems healthy. They don't like to move fast. So they want, to check all the updates, all the upgrades. They want to see how they're going. Unlike developers, they don't really like UIs. They prefer automation. So they like their scripts, their CLIs, their APIs. And it is their job to help developers. So even though, they don't send code to production, they want to unblock developers and help them with what they need. And usually it's the creation of test environments, or let's say solving production issues. And ideally, if you ask them, they would like the developers to be self-serve. Like they hate tickets where a developer opens a ticket and says, please give me a Kubernetes cluster, and then they have to take care of this ticket. This is not how they would like to spend their time. And then everybody else wants to be on top of the software delivery process. They want to see how the team is doing. They want to see what is the velocity of the team. And they hate blockers. Like they don't want, people getting blocked when they want to do something, maybe to start a new project or to make a deployment. They don't want to see tickets being opened and staying open for a lot of time. They want to see every other, let's say, persona doing what they're best at, like developers creating code and sending it to production, and DevOps people keeping the system healthy. So these are the people that we're going to talk about today, and hopefully Port has something for everybody. Okay, so we have talked about the people. Let's talk about the problem. We are going to talk about information overload, and I will start with an analogy first. So if you have ever booked an airline ticket, you go to the website of the airline company, and the questions you are being asked are very, let's say, straightforward. Where are you departing from? Where you go? How many people? And what is the date? That's the whole thing. There are certainly, many other decisions on the part of the airline, but they are not interesting to you. They're completely hidden away, and you're answering only in these important questions for you. Now, imagine if you went to an airline company tomorrow and their website looked like this. So instead of asking, the basic questions, they would also ask you, hey, who is the pilot? And there is a drop-down box there. Or what terminal should we use? Or what is, the name of the air hostess? Or how much fuel we should put in the airplane? This is a really important, let's say, question. So if you saw this, you would say immediately, no, this is too complex for me, and I'm going to use another airline company. And you would be correct, because all these are important questions, but only for the airline company, not for you. So if you take an example, the fuel, this is a super important problem. They have special, programs to calculate how much fuel should go into a plane, but this doesn't matter to you. As an end user of getting into an airplane and flying, you don't want to see any of this. You want these decisions hidden and abstracted away. And this is what airline companies have done. They have abstracted all this away. And I'm mentioning this analogy because, unfortunately, this is exactly the same thing that we do with developers today. We have, so many systems and so many systems of different type, like clusters, database, networks, subnets, S3 buckets, whatever. And usually what we do is we expose everything to developers, and we make the mistake of thinking that everything is important. And in a sense, everything is important. Like if you ask, your AWS person, they should say, yes, the buckets are important. Or if you ask your database person, the database is important. But for a developer, they are not. Developers, as we remember, just want to write code and nothing else. And right now we are stressing them out because we show them everything. And we don't want to show them everything. If you remember the example of the airline company, we want to keep only the things that matter and abstract everything else. And I'm pretty amazed, right now, if you look at the ecosystem of Kubernetes and cloud native, because there are so many tools that are coming out, and even though they are great tools, they are at the wrong level of abstraction. Like they are useful to a specific kind of people. Because as a developer, the first thing I do in the morning is to go and look at my persistent volume claims. Said no developer ever. Okay, I'm not interested in persistent volume claims as a developer. So even though Prometheus and Grafana is a great system, it is not something that developers should have to look at. One thing also I didn't mention in the introduction is I'm also working on the open source project Argo CD and Argo rollouts. So this is something, I have in my heart. And I several times listen to conversations and people say, yes, we love Argo CD because it has a very nice UI that we give to developers and they know what is going on. And I'm asking myself, why should developers look at this? Like if you look at the screenshot, the only thing interesting for me is that my application is healthy and maybe that my pod is healthy. That's it. Do I care about endpoint slices? No. Do I care about Kubernetes network services? No. Do I care about replica sets? No. So even though, Argo CD is a great project that I really like, and I'm actually part of it, this is not something you should show to developers because it has too much information that they do not care about. So what we should do instead, we should focus only on what matters, and this is where Port comes in. Now, if you have never looked at Port before, it's a developer portal or an internal developer platform, and essentially it's a custom, let's say, dashboard or set of dashboards for developers. So instead of showing everything to developers, we make a choice and we say, now only these things are interesting to developers. Let's show them only the things that we have decided they are important for them. And one of the great things about Port is that it's very customizable, unlike other solutions that you have seen. So here you can decide exactly what is important to you, your organization, and your developers. As far as Port is concerned, there are no restrictions on what you want to show. You can go as deep as you want and make your choices. So this is, let's say, the state in a company before Port. where developers are overwhelmed with all the external systems. Everything is thrown at them. They have access to everything, and they need to look at 10 different dashboards to understand what is going on. And then we say, okay, let's put Port in the game. So we create a developer portal for them that essentially hides all the abstraction of the other different systems and presents only what developers want to see. And I'm saying hiding, but it's like it's not, disappearing forever. If a developer wants to go to an external system, they can still go. And Port is a great place, where if you want to drill down on something, you can click and go to that respective, let's say, platform. But it's not, let's say, the first thing that you look. So Port is the first dashboard that you would want to see every day as a developer. And then it's your choice to go to a different system and look into more details and drill down on the things that you want to look at. But let's say the main goal of Port is to show you only the thing that matters to you. And we are talking about developers today, but we can say the same thing for other parts in the company. So maybe, database people would like to see different things. And one of the, let's say, main advantages of Port, and this is the thing that I like, is that it's completely customizable. You can do whatever you want. There is no restriction on what you're going to use. So these are some of the common use cases where, people are using Port for, but it's up to you. You can create exactly your own dashboard as you want it. And we will see today 2 demos of, different use. And actually, this brings us to demo number 1. So I have here my Port instance, and it's completely empty. Like there is nothing for you, to see here. All the screens are empty. And the first thing I do, and now I'm wearing my hat of, the DevOps person or the person that's going to decide what developers should look, is to create a blueprint. This is how it's called in Port, and essentially decide, the objects that my developers would look. And here Port has a very fancy, let's say, UI generator that you can use. And I can say, hey, I want to show a microservice or a database. But this has been shown many times in other previous videos, and I want to do something different today. Because remember, if I'm an SRE person or a DevOps person, I don't really like UIs. So even though, here you can choose stuff and say, oh, I want to map my Kubernetes cluster, this is great. I'm going to use the things I love. So what do I love as an SRE person? I love terminals and Terraform. So Port here is one step ahead. There is a Terraform provider for Port. And I've already created an example. I will show you later the code. And instead of clicking buttons and making stuff, I will just run Terraform apply, and then I will do a yes. You can still use the UI, let's say, way of creating blueprints, but this is, let's say, good for me if you ask for experimentation or for the initial thing. And here we have a surprise demo that not even More has seen before this webinar. Yes, ladies and gentlemen, you can use Port to manage your music collection. I'm really happy that I did this, and for the first time ever. I want to be honest with you, this is not the demo that we are going to see today. There is a real demo, coming up. But I think this is a testament to, let's say, the capabilities of Port and how, easy it is to get away on the things that the system forces into you and make your choices. So here I said, hey, I'm going to use Port to manage my music library. And I have a blueprint, for an artist where I have defined what is the name of the artist, what is the style, an album, and a song. And one of the most powerful, let's say, features of Port is that you can define relations. So here there is a clear relationship, and I'm saying a song belongs to an album, belongs to an artist. So this is my model. So if you're a developer, these are, let's say, my classes, or if you're a DB person, these are my tables. And now I want to fill data, and the Terraform provider also has the capability to insert data. So the classes are called blueprints, these are called entities. And here, as an example, I've already gone ahead and created several songs and albums, all from Terraform. So I can look at my library, what I have, and if I click on any on the entities, I can also see the relationship that I was talking before. So here I'm looking at a specific album, and I know who is the artist, I know what songs it contains, and then I can go back and move to the relationship and go to that artist and look at the other albums. So this is how you would define it. And if you look at the, let's say, GitHub repo, this is completely open source. I will send you the link afterwards, or you can see it here. This is the source for the surprise demo because it wasn't even known to More. And essentially, I have my set of Terraform files. If you have never seen Terraform before, it's a very good open source system from HashiCorp, which allows you to define your infrastructure as code. But here, I'm saying I'm going to use my port provider, and then I have defined in HCL all the resources that you've seen in the UI. So here I'm explaining, what is an artist, what are the properties, what is the album, and then if I go to a specific artist, I have all the properties. So that's how I would define as an SRE the model, like make a choice, and you can still, as I said, keep the UI if you want to experiment and learn, how things work. This is actually how I did this for the demo. So now we're going to destroy this and start our real demo. And I could, of course, use the terminal and do a Terraform destroy, but we're going to put Codefresh in the mix. So here I have all my pipelines in Codefresh that affect port, and they are running Terraform behind the scenes. And I'm going to click on a pipeline that I have, which is destroy the surprise schema, because we don't want this anymore. And I'm going to talk, about Codefresh in a minute, but essentially behind the scenes, it just runs Terraform destroy with the same parameters. And while this is being destroyed, and I think this is one of the powers of Terraform, I'm going to click on another pipeline, which actually has all the details for the real demo that we are going to see today. And I'm also defined everything in Terraform. So for the first time ever in a port webinar, everything is defined in Terraform. All demos are with Terraform. So I'm going in port blueprint create, which is my real, let's say, example. And I'm going to run this as well, so we can look at the slides why they are both running. So now if I'm going to look at my builds, and I think, this is great and how automation works, there are two pipelines running. One is destroying, let's say, port definitions, and one is creating port definitions. Okay, so back to the slides. We have seen essentially how port works with Terraform and how easy and how powerful is the way of generation your model. So port, as you might know by now, essentially it's the portal, but it doesn't do anything on its own. Like port, doesn't compile stuff, it doesn't run Terraform, it doesn't build Docker images. You need another system for this. And today we're going to use Codefresh for that. Now, Codefresh is a huge system, and this webinar, is not about Codefresh, so I'm not going into too many details. Codefresh has a pipeline system, like a CI system, a CD system, and a Github system powered by Argo CD, which is also why I'm involved with Argo CD. And today we're going to mostly see the pipelines, where you define the steps in the pipeline, and each step that you see in the screen is a Docker container. So in my case, I was using a Docker container from HashiCorp that contains Terraform. And the big advantage of Codefresh versus other solutions is that it was designed specifically for Kubernetes. Most of the solutions that you have worked with were, let's say, solutions for virtual machines. And when Kubernetes appeared, they tried to adapt. Codefresh was designed for containers and Kubernetes from scratch. And I think this is important because it goes back to the discussion of abstraction. So I know what you will say here. You will say, yes, you're working for Codefresh, but why not use GitHub Actions or CircleCI or Jenkins or TeamCity? And my answer is, yes, you can do it. Like port is agnostic. Even though we're going to look at Codefresh today, you can use port with CircleCI, TeamCity, GitHub Actions, or whatever you use. But here I have a simple example where on the left, I have the pipeline from GitHub Actions that creates a Docker image, and I have the exact same pipeline in Codefresh. And you can look at GitHub Actions exposes too much information, like it deals, with the registry and what are the credentials to the registry. If I'm a developer, I don't really care about the credentials to the registry. While at Codefresh, I'm just saying I'm going to build an image and push it to the registry by name, Docker Hub. The same example is with our Kubernetes deployment. So on the left, it's the GitHub Actions pipeline for Kubernetes deployment. Then you can see a big part of the pipeline is dealing with AWS authentication and ECR logins and stuff like this, which are not interesting to me as a developer. So the Codefresh pipeline is super simple. I'm just saying, hey, deploy to this cluster, and I know the cluster by name. So I think it's pretty interesting that, all this discussion about abstraction not only applies to port itself, but also with Codefresh, where we've already made an effort to hide non-essential stuff from the people that deal with pipelines. So essentially, the magic sauce in Codefresh, and we're going to look at this in the demo, is that you go once as a DevOps person in a special screen where you connect your clusters, your registries with authentication, and then everything that you connected is available to developers by a name. So I'm deploying to this cluster, and I don't need to know anything about kube configs. So let's see at what was done in the background while we were talking. So here I will replace my page And now we have the, let's say, the real example, the one that we are going to use for today's webinar. And essentially, I've made a choice and I said, I'm going to expose to developers the minimum possible thing. So I have a definition of an environment, and you can see, I'm not even saying that it's Kubernetes, but it's Kubernetes behind the scenes. Then I have a microservice, which is what, a developer would use. Then the microservice has some libraries. And then I have a deployment, which is, what happens between microservice and an environment. And you can see I have defined all the relationships. So it's clear that this deployment is for this microservice and it goes to this environment. Then I have a build, which will map to a Codefresh build. And it's what is going to create the initial, let's say, Docker image. And I think the final thing is I have a promotion. And I think this is super interesting, coming back, to the point that you can do whatever you want. So usually people are accustomed and say, oh, I have an S3 bucket, I will map it to port, or I have a build and I will map it to port. You can do whatever you want. You don't need to necessarily map, entities that actually exist. So here I'm saying, for me, a promotion is super important. So I will map it as an entity and say, I want to know when promotions happen, and I want to know which microservice was promoted from which environment and what environment. That is my choice. And, port gave me the flexibility to do this. So if you ask me, an environment is a Kubernetes cluster, but a promotion is not something specific. So this is the schema. And then, if we look at the data, there is nothing right now. Everything is empty. So we need to explain how we will fill all this stuff. But this is the absolute, let's say, minimum thing that I think developers should look at. Everything else is not interesting to them. So how do we fill this with data? Let's see a real world example. And this is actually, the example I want to show you. This is the case where, as a developer, I want to start a brand new application. This is brand new, okay? There is nothing else there. So in big companies, usually what happens is I need to create an inventory of stuff and say, oh, what do I need? I need a GitHub repo. I need a Kubernetes cluster. I need a Docker registry. I need a pipeline. So I will collect all these things. And then I need to ask, people and get these created. And if it's a really big company, maybe it's even different departments. So first you need to go to the GitHub team and ask for the repository. Then you need to go to the Kubernetes team and ask for a cluster, and so on and so on. And unfortunately, sometimes you might even need to open tickets. So you open a ticket for a cluster and then you wait. So this is something that can be super lengthy, and this is not something we want. Actually, when I'm interviewing at a company, usually I ask them how much time it takes for you, to create a microservice, and depending on the answer, I can see how, let's say, important developer experience is for them. So we don't want to do this. Instead, we want to do everything in a single step. So I'm saying I'm going to create a brand new application, and I don't really, care if it's like a Terraform file or a script or an API call. I want to do everything in a single step. And even this image is not correct. Like, you would think that, the developer was going to ask the person, hey, create an application for me. But remember, the dream for DevOps people is for developers to be self-serve. So developers will do everything. So we will create a pipeline that essentially will create everything a developer needs in a single step. So we will create a GitHub repo, the clusters. We will create 3 clusters in less than 5 minutes, and you will see the trick for this. We will create the pipelines in Codefresh, we will connect the clusters, and we will show everything to port for the developers to work. So essentially, this is, let's say, a pipeline in Codefresh that will not actually compile code. It will create other stuff and other infrastructure. And as you can imagine, we are going to use Terraform for everything because it's a great tool and because DevOps people love Terraform. So as we have seen, there is already a Terraform provider for port, but there is also a Terraform provider for Codefresh, for creating Codefresh pipelines. There is a Terraform provider for GitHub, for creating the repository with the source code. And there is a Terraform provider for the clusters that we are going to use today. So that's a very quick example, with a Terraform provider for Codefresh for creating this. Same thing with a GitHub repository. So this is a standard feature of GitHub. We're not going, to create a repository from scratch, but GitHub has a capability where you define a repository as a template. And essentially, this is something that your team, would create and say, this is the approved way of creating a microservice in our company. And then you have skeleton source code, and let's say all the useful libraries that you should use as a starting point. So essentially, the provider says, take this template and copy it to a real Git repository that developers can use. So that's the pipeline. And we were going to see the demo that we will do all these steps, create both the infrastructure, create the pipelines, and report everything to port. So we could go, into Codefresh and click the button, but we said that even Codefresh is an abstraction detail, and we don't want, to force developers to look at Codefresh. So Port has the capability to abstract this as well. So apart, from the blueprints and the entities, you can also create actions in Port, which is essentially, what developers would like to see, like I click a button and everything happens behind the scenes. And you can actually see from this example that, here we have two separate actions. One is creating the environment and one is creating the service, but we said we are going to do all in one. So just one action, not two actions. So this is the actual, demo that I want to show you, and it's the one that it's, let's say, the most realistic. So first of all, here there is a self-service, let's say, area in Port, and there is already a button for me called Create Everything. And I think it's also interesting to show here that this, actually, let's start it because it will take some time. I think it's interesting to show that this button as well was created from Terraform. So here was, my real example, and I have my entities, and I'm saying what is a microservice, what is the library, what is everything, but I also have a separate file for actions. So even this action was created by me as a DevOps person, and I'm saying here I have this action. So I clicked on it, and now there is, let's say, a progress window which shows only what the developers should look at. So here, you can decide what is the level of abstraction that you want for developers. I'm saying to my developer, hey, creating your Git repo, your environments, your everything. This is what the developer sees, but we are going to show you what happens behind the scenes and what an SRE would see. So first of all, I want to show you some things that if I'm going into my GitHub account and I search for Port, let's see if I did this on time. There are only two repositories. That's the repository that has my Terraform code, and that's my skeleton. And if I go also to Codefresh, I want to show you my cluster screen where there are no clusters yet. Yes, Mor, you want to say something?
Yeah, so while you're going through this, we have a question in the chat asking, how do you integrate Port with Codefresh?
Okay, perfect. That's a very good question. So Port has gone ahead and already created an integration with the GitOps module of Port. So you can go and find this ready to use. The second example that I'm going to show is actually use Terraform as a middleman. And there is also a third way where you just call the API from a Codefresh pipeline. I will show you this in demo. So if you're using the GitOps, let's say, product of Codefresh, you're good to go. There is official integration. If you're using the classic CI system, you can also do it from the API. Yeah, I didn't mention this. Like Port has, apart from Terraform provider, there is an API, so you can do whatever you want, from any programming language, from any system, from anything. So let's see what is happening behind the scenes. I'm going to go to builds, and this is essentially the resulting Codefresh pipeline that was launched from the action. And you can see, all the things. And virtual clusters, I didn't mention this. And you know that if you are on a cloud provider like AWS and you create a real cluster, it takes 15 minutes. So we're not going to wait 15 minutes for the demo. So here I'm using virtual clusters. And if you're not familiar with this project, it's an open source project. I think it's great. And essentially it creates Kubernetes clusters in a parent cluster inside namespaces. So they are not, real in the sense that there isn't like a real control plane, but they are compatible fully with the Kubernetes API. So you get a Kube API, let's say, installation in your namespace, and then you have multiple clusters. And the advantage is, this is like super fast and super cheap to create. So here we created 3 clusters, one for QA, one for production, one for staging in just 1 minute and a half. And actually, if I go to my repository, I can show you that this is super simple because they provide a Helm file. And then with Terraform, you can also install Helm charts. So here I'm saying create 3 virtual clusters, which is, this is my production, this is my staging, and this is my QA. And actually, I think we can see them here. So vCluster has an API as well that you can look. So here I'm in my real cluster. And if you look at my real cluster, it has namespaces with those clusters. And then I can say vCluster list, and it shows me the clusters that are created. So this has almost finished. So now let's see what was created. Going back, to the developer. Remember, the developer doesn't see any of this. The developer says, "Oh, creating your stuff. Everything is ready. Just commit your code now." So behind the scenes, what did we do? Here, if I go back to my GitHub and I go to my repositories, now there is a brand new repository, my port app, which you can see it was created like right now. And this is what the developer will use. So they can start keeping code. Codefresh is already set up automatically to monitor commits here and do stuff. Then here, if I look at Codefresh, behind the scenes, there is a brand new project, which you have seen. I'm saying it's Terraform created, and this has some pipelines, and it's the first pipeline for building and for promoting. And then if I go also to my cluster screen, in my pipeline integrations, remember that in Codefresh, you go and set up your clusters once, and then you just mention them by name. Now here I have 4 clusters. This is the first one, the first I start, then it's the real cluster, and then I have 3, let's say, virtual clusters, and everything is shown by name. So this is what is happening behind the scenes. The developer sees only this. If they want, they can go to Codefresh. And now if we go back to the catalog, if we go to the microservice, now there is a new microservice created, and there is a link to the GitHub repo that we also just created. There is an example with libraries, and this, this is a simple example. It's not a real Java application, but I think it's interesting because now you can do a connection, which libraries are deployed to which environment. So this is a very popular question where somebody's looking to understand which version of a library is deployed where. Here, port, can combine these 2 words because we have, the knowledge of environments and we have the knowledge of libraries. Most of the systems know one or the other. So coming back, to the example of Argo CD, Argo CD knows nothing about libraries or, unit test or what is in a Docker image. It just knows deployments. And then I have my 3 environments were created, in 1 minute and 10. And you can see there is nothing here that is saying that they are Kubernetes, because I don't think it's important to the developer. So now the developer has everything they need. We created in a single step, 3 environments, the microservice, the pipelines, and everything, and they can start working. And the first thing a developer should do is, deploy the application. So how you do it? You go into Codefresh and you hit deploy. No, you don't go into Codefresh and hit deploy. That's the whole point. So here we created 2 more actions. So for the first time ever, ladies and gentlemen, in a port demo, you had an action that itself created actions, okay? I think this is a super interesting pattern that I've never seen before. So we don't really care about Codefresh now. I click this action, and now magically with Terraform, I have 2 more actions. So as a developer, I still stay, within port, and I say, I'm going to build my application. And here, just to simplify the demo, I'm also going to deploy it to QA. So it's 2 in 1, like building the Docker image and then deploying into QA. So as far as as developers is concerned, everything is self-service. They don't need to do anything else. So now the pattern, is the same. As a developer, there is like a process in port, but behind the scenes, a build will run in Codefresh, and it's actually the pipeline that again was created with Terraform. So not only we had a port action that created port actions, we had a Codefresh pipeline that created Codefresh pipeline. So these are the pipelines that were created, and I think the build one is this one.
So while all of these, while all of these actions and pipelines are running, we have another question in the chat asking, does port have some built-in ways to manage who can trigger and approve actions?
I think this was one of my questions in a port webinar, and yes, there is a way where correct me if I'm wrong, where you can define privileges and rights and say that person only from that team, can click, there is also an approval mechanism that I didn't show. So in a port action, you can say before this port action, is actually activated, you need an approval. And then it's an extra, let's security or safety step if you are in a company that also needs approval for something, and you can have, your team lead approve that. So it's not like, single button and something happens. You can make it more complex, and then also have, security constraints on who can approve. Yes, do I know this correctly? Did I miss something?
You know this stuff better than me, Kostis, at this point.
No, I think it makes sense because it is one of the actions. We actually, have an approval mechanism in Codefresh, as you can imagine, because, you can stop a pipeline in the middle and then have somebody approve, especially with Terraform. A very popular question is you run Terraform plan first, and then, somebody approves Terraform and says, okay, let's, send it. So we had to implement the exact same thing. So this is the pipeline that ran behind the scenes. That was the building of a Docker image, and that was the deployment. And here, the first thing I'm doing is, reporting to port that something will happen. And in this example, I'm not using Terraform. I'm actually calling the API. So I created an image by mistake. There is already an image that port has created for the integration, but I didn't know at the time. And I'm using the API, and I'm saying a build is running. And I'm also doing the same thing for the deployment. And, this is an example that I created. You could have here unit tests, integration tests, security scan, everything. So this is what is running behind the scenes. And now if I go back to port to my catalogs, there is a brand new deployment, which is the one I did, which was in QA, because this is let's say, my starting environment. And you can see now we can answer the question that we had before, like what, libraries are deployed where. We know here the deployment. We can go to the microservice, and from here we know the libraries. So we can say, yes, in QA right now, it's FreeMarker version 2.3, whatever. And for this also, there is the build that we reported, which was, the initial container build. And here, coming back, to the discussion that if the developers, want to drill down, this is what they look at port, but I had added a nice link to Codefresh, so they can click on it if they want. This is their choice. That's the important thing, and they can go into Codefresh and look at the pipeline if they want. So now we have the initial deployment, and the only thing missing is to fill promotions. So coming back to the self-service action, there is another one. I think I didn't mention here is you can see the distinction when you define an action in port. You can say whether it's a create action, like something that creates something, or a two-day action where it's something you already have and you do something with it. So this is the creating because it created everything, but everything else, I'm doing something on an existing microservice. So from promotion, I'm going to do the same thing. I'm going to promote, and here I've made an assumption that I'm promoting from QA to staging. In a more real example, you would have more options here where you could ask the user where they want to promote from and where they want to promote to. Port, has a great way of adding properties not only to blueprints but also to actions, so you can get the exact information that you want and map it accordingly. And then we have the same pattern, which I don't think I have enough time to show everything, but essentially what will happen is that you will see a promotion later. The important thing to keep is that as far as developers are concerned, they always stay within port. And if they want, they go to other systems, to Codefresh, to environments. So here also I have a Codefresh link for the cluster. So if they want to go to look at the cluster, they can come here and look at the cluster. Or I have an imagery link, to Grafana if they want to see something with logs. So I think that's it for the demo. Hopefully you enjoyed. It was the first time ever in a webinar that you saw Terraform creating the port blueprint. It was the first time ever that you saw a port action creating port actions. I think it was the first time ever that you saw a Codefresh pipeline creating pipelines. And I think it was also interesting to see that, the initial create action did everything. So I didn't, click an action to create the environment and then my microservice and then the deployment. I created it all in one step. So what is the end result? Remember, people are important, not tools. Everybody's happy. Developers are completely self-serve. They stay in port. They click buttons in port. They are not, interested in Kubernetes manifest or persistent volumes or something else. DevOps people are also super happy. I did, the initial setup, creating the schema and my pipelines with Terraform. But after that, I'm not doing anything at all. I'm just sitting, and developers just click buttons in port. There are no open tickets. There is nothing to block them. And also DevOps people are super happy because everybody is focused on what they should do. Like developers write code and they don't want to wait anything from anyone. And SREs also can do their duties and they don't need to provide stuff to developers. So people are also happy. So this is why you should use Port and Codefresh. That's it.
Okay, Kostis, thank you.
Hopefully you learned something.
Yeah, so thank you so much. This session was awesome. And I'm really happy that I didn't know what actions and what Terraform plans you plan on doing, because it was super cool to see it live. So again, thank you so much. We're gonna give it a few more minutes. If anyone has additional questions they want to ask, and then both of us are here to answer it. It could be either on Port or on Codefresh or on how they connect.
I think we should also answer the most popular question regarding Port. That I was using the SaaS version of Port, and the number one question is, I want to host it on-prem. And as far as I know, this is on the plans and it's coming at some point. Codefresh is already there. Like you can get Codefresh as SaaS or on-prem, or there is also a hybrid version where you run the pipelines in your cluster, and then the UI is hosted by Codefresh, up to you. So in a big company, you could take Port on-prem when this is released, and Codefresh on-prem as it is released right now. So this is possible. I think also the key takeaway, because I've looked at some other developer portals, is the flexibility of Port. I think Port right now is the number one, let's say, internal developer portal that is fully customizable. There are other products like this, but they are very constrained. And in some of them, you need to write TypeScript to extend them in any way. And I don't really like writing TypeScript to extend systems, at least for me. I prefer to write, JSON or Terraform and do my stuff. I'm not mentioning what is the system, but you should know. Question about GCP.
Oh, okay. Yeah, so I'll take this. So Port already has a template for a GCP, which you can find it in our templates in the builder page. We are also planning to add an integration for Azure very soon, and we already have an existing integration for AWS. Oh, I see it's grayed out right now, but
yeah, okay.
There is an example in our docs. So let me just go ahead and pull that and put it in the chat for the webinar, just so everyone has it. But yeah, we do have an integration with GCP, and Azure is coming soon, as I said. So don't worry, whatever cloud provider you plan on using, you can get data from it into Port. Oh yeah, there it is. So you can see the examples. Some of these use Terraform, some of these use the GCP Cloud Console API. So that is a way you can bring GCP into your Port developer portal. Awesome. So I can see that there are no more questions. And of course, if you guys have questions later on, then remember that this session will be uploaded to Port's YouTube channel. So you can comment there. And also in the recording, you can see our email. So you can message us later if you find other questions that you want to ask. And as I said before, since the session is recorded, everyone who registered for the webinar will receive the recording. And again, Kostis, thank you so much for joining us and bringing us this amazing demo. And for you guys, we'll see you in the next session very soon.